morning, Mo.
Morning.
Today we're going to do a continuation of the school security.
hmm
And here in a few minutes, we're going to have Principal Michelle Kefford on. She's the principal of Marjory Stoneman Douglas. She actually became principal the year after the shooting took place,
hmm
and the principal that was there when the shooting occurred stepped down. And we're going to get into not details because we don't want to circumvent this increased security that they have at the school, but we're going to talk about kind of what happened afterwards. Going to dig into her life a little bit, like what I've never actually had a long form conversation with a principal before, and also what's going on, what has taken place since the shooting for school security. Where's it going? What's the legislation? She's a big advocate for obviously school security, but she's also a great principal. When I met her a few years ago, I was working with the Secret Service on Vice President Harris's detail at the time, and they were doing well, let me back it up. When the shooting happened, it happened in 2018. They actually kept that building where it all happened. I think it was building 12, basically closed off as evidence. They fenced it off. They didn't touch anything. There was still broken glass, blood. I mean, it was really kind of eerie. There were still notebooks from where the students were. I mean, they had
Wow.
picked up all the shell casings and all those things like that, but the scene was pretty much kept as it was just through, they wanted to take legislators through it, Congress people, senators. I think she was the highest ranking politician to ever visit it. I don't think anyone else has seen it, but
Wow.
also heads of the FBI, just a bunch of different law enforcement. They wanted to show this is what happened, this is how it happened, and to increase that awareness. I won't use the name of the shooter. Everybody probably knows by now, or you can Google it if you want. But basically, it was a former student, was upset, angry at the school for whatever reason, comes walking through the parking lot, is seen by, when I say school security, it's like, like a coach or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's not
Right.
real school security like on a golf cart.
Yeah, it's just coaches and what have driving around
And
being
again,
another
it's a,
set of
it's a
eyes.
very big school. It's a very big school. And so they looked like a student, it was kind of, because he was a student, right? But they didn't know, they didn't dig into like, is he still go here? What's going on? So they don't really address it. He goes into the side door of building 12. He had a duffel bag. He starts unloading the duffel bag. One student sees him. He goes, "You need to get out of here. Bad things are about to happen." Has a rifle and loads it, has magazines. He did magazine changes throughout the course of the shooting, all that. So he goes through, it's a 3-story building. He goes through the first floor and he's shooting into the classrooms. He's just walking down the hallway, shooting into the classrooms. You can see where he shot into the classroom. It was happening very fast. The first floor, I mean, it was chaos. You could see there's just shit everywhere. And nobody really understood what was happening. Like, I think a coach tried to come in through the opposite end of the building, up through and out the hallway. The shooter killed him in the doorway. Kids were trying to pour out of the classrooms to escape. The first floor was just chaos. The second floor could hear the shots. So this is what's interesting. The second floor, they locked the doors, shut off all the lights, and everybody moved to like a corner of the room where you couldn't be seen in the doorway. So as he works his way up the stairs, I think he does a magazine change. He shoots it to the classrooms, but there was no casualties on the second floor. The third floor, at this point, the fire alarm's going off because when you're firing a rifle indoors, it's kicking up dust, it's doing all this stuff. And they're on the third floor, so they couldn't hear the sounds of the shooting. The fire alarm's going off, there's dust kicking up everywhere. They thought it was a fire. So they start pouring out into the stairwells. And as he's working up, I think he kills one student in the stairwell on his way to the third floor, gets to the third floor, kind of mass pandemonium going on. I can't remember. I mean, there were 17 overall deaths from this shooting and an additional 17 injured. So the third floor was almost as deadly as the first floor. Now, he gets to the end of the building at the end of the hallway of this classroom. And his plan was, because you could see the bullet holes, was to set up on the third floor and shoot people as they're pouring out into the parking lot, whatever. But,
Right.
and it's interesting, it wasn't bulletproof glass, but it was hurricane glass. It stopped the rounds. And I think and I apologize, it was 5 or 6 rounds. And we're not going to be digging into this kind of detail with Michelle. There's no reason for it. She's been peppered about this for many years at this point. But so he just gets up and leaves. He leaves his gun. He leaves everything there. He blends it with the crowd. And I think he ends up going to like a McDonald's. Now, keep
Yeah.
in mind, while this is going on, at first it was a fire alarm. Then it was like, oh, he's shooting people. So it's just pandemonium, chaos, right? And the way the school's set up is right across the street is a residential neighborhood.
Okay.
So parents are like driving over the shrubs and stuff. Kids are running. They're pouring out into the streets. They didn't know if it was a fire. They didn't know if it was a shooting. It was just who was doing what. I know there was a couple off duty that they were off duty. They weren't working. They were cops. They were like running with like their gun and their badge and like shorts and flip flops because they just knew something was going on. They're trying to figure it out. They're trying to set up, some sort of boundary to figure out what the fuck is going on. On top of that, they're trying to get to the building to provide aid. So, I mean, I try to paint that picture because people hear shooting and which is a tragedy and horrific. But you're also like the hundreds of students, parents, concerned citizens, and then on top of that, you've got hundreds of cops swarming in, right? So I try to paint that picture to the best of my ability because there's like, why did it take so long for them? They're trying to figure out what the fuck is going on.
That's chaos.
And then witnesses, I talked to a few of the people who were there, and they were like, we had 15 different descriptions. And then a couple of people like, I think it was this kid again, because he used to go there. He wasn't there. He wasn't a student anymore. So a lot of kids didn't know him. Right? So anyway, all that happens. It takes several hours of filtering through everything. And then keep in mind, when they get there, they don't know if he's still in the building. SWAT has to go through, and they're going through methodically, and they're seeing bodies and blood and injured people, and they're having to go through all three stairs. Each classroom, they have to clear each classroom, the closets. I mean, it's just, I can't express to you how
chaotic,
methodical, tedious, and slow it felt. I'm sure, but I can imagine as a former cop, it was probably rapid fire. Like, oh my God, what's going on?
You have two different perspectives. That you got the cops that are like, this is a lot, but you got parents that are anguished to figure out what's going on too. So
where's my kid?
Yeah.
Right. And, and then I think I can't remember, it was a few adults and it was mostly students, but so you have their, the adults, their wives, their children, whatever, right? You have all this going on and you don't know now he's not in the building. Is he in any of the other buildings?
Yeah.
See what I'm saying? Like, so now they got to clear the school. Anyway, I couldn't begin to imagine. So based off that, I mean, they ended up catching them. Again, I'm not trying to relive the stories line by line and do a deep dive into the actual case itself. It's just more the concept of school security.
Right. And let me just preface it saying that we are working on trying to get someone that did a deep dive with this, who is a subject matter expert, law enforcement officer, about school shootings and things like that. And that'll give a little more perspective on the shooting. This just isn't the format today.
Yeah, correct. Not today. Not with Michelle. So that launches $1 million. Again, I'm gonna do my best. And I told Michelle, we're not. The politics of it, I hate when these things become political, but the political aspect that I believe was positive was it changed legislation, funding for school security, meaning like hard barriers. So there's like chain link fences around the entire property. With this, all this stuff costs money, right? So you got to do, and it's parents, it's like a pain in the ass because now there's only one point of entry to the school. Kids can't just walk across the street. Or, you know what I mean? Like you're funneling everybody into one point of entry. But for safety purposes, it's one of those things where when it starts, you're like, oh, that makes sense. Why haven't we always done it that way? You know what I mean? Because I remember going to high school, it was trailers and modules. Kids were just funneling from all points of the school property. It's not like that anymore.
The only thing that was fenced when I went to school was the student parking lot. And when I say fenced, we could go out, open the gate and leave because we had a bunch of people that were enrolled in OJT. So they had on-the-job training. So they'd leave and go to work and then come back. I mean, we had essentially an open campus.
Yeah. Same concept, right? And especially in Florida, it's just kind of how they all used to be. But since then, they have the chain link fences, they have the hard entries, they have better cameras. I'm going to save some of that conversation because it was some stuff that got brought up while I was there. And it was actually one of the few things that Kamala Harris was talking to with the parents, which I was like, these are great ideas. We'll save that because I'm going to talk about it with Michelle. All right, so back to the visit. So we're setting all that up. And one of the things is Kamala Harris's team, they wanted to meet with the parents of the victims. And it was wild. I actually had to step out because a lot of the parents had never been back into the school, and the emotions from seeing that's where my son or daughter died, you could still see it, the wails, the pain. I mean, and this was 6 years after the fact, roughly. Which again, I can't even begin to imagine. So I'm not saying that as a way to be like, oh, get over it. It's not like that at all. It's like, you could still see the pain, but the way they handled that shooting, to me, meaning like the aftermath and how they were trying to show and preserve, I think it was well done. I think it hit home in a way that usually, it just kind of is a blip on the news. It's like, oh, it's a tragedy, and they move on. They're like, no, we need to learn from this so it doesn't ever happen again. And I want to talk to Michelle about those things. And I'm excited to get into this with her because she's an administrator at the school. And again, she's taking over at a time when there's still pain, concerns, a lot of changes going on at the school. And then, not to put a price on people, but budget concerns, because now you got to ramp up school security, you got to ramp up communication with law enforcement. You're going to have school resource officers now on campus where in years past you didn't, and you're having to deal with all that, right? On top of I'm sure the first couple of years just bombarded with what's going on. We need to see it, scheduling visits, and every politician from the vice president, on down the local school district or whatever probably wanted to go through and understand and talk to her.
Right.
And so she's having to learn all that. Now, with that being said, she had already been a principal, I think, for 17 years at a different high school. She was principal of the year for the state of Florida. I can tell you, while I was there, she was well liked by again, it was a handful of teachers, a handful of administrative vice principals, some coaching. They were all like, dude, she's doing a great job. She's doing, the amount of energy and effort she puts in and works, and she's constantly traveling around speaking, trying to push this out. So she's doing the Lord's work, as it were, to make sure school security is in the forefront of everybody's thoughts and not just a blip on the news and then
Right.
move on.
It's funny when you were talking to me about, you had an opportunity to go to the school. I didn't realize that they had preserved the space like that. That's just, and it's heartbreaking that we have to do that. But at the same
Yeah.
time, what better way to make people realize the gravity of the changes that need to happen? We don't like it to get political, but the reality is it has to, in order for changes to be made. It has to
Yeah.
become a political thing because, like you stated, it's a money thing. They've got to allocate more money for that. So you've got to justify, and for them to take in that moment of horrific time and just pause it so that individuals who literally are thousands of miles away and have the ability of that distance to kind of distance themselves from the situation, it brings them into it. And I commend, whether you like it or not, commend the vice president for stepping up and saying, I will meet with the families, because a lot of politicians would avoid that because they know the pain that they're going to see, and they know
For
the
sure.
anguish, and they know that they maybe ask questions that they don't have the answer to, or that they may not have thought of, and things like that. So that part is commendable. At least want to meet with them and discuss with these individuals, what do you guys want? Because, I can't imagine being a parent going through something like this, and then subsequently, what do I do? I've looked into not just this school shooting, but there's a lot of them where parents have used this to really mobilize themselves for, like, doing some good, doing some changes. There's another, the school shooting, Sandy Hook. They created an entire nonprofit company that's huge, and they are a big push for the See Something, Say Something, like campaign that goes out to high schools and to junior high schools for the kids to tell them when it is the time that they should be reporting information and that kind of thing. And you look, and like you said, this is something you go, why weren't we doing this before? But it was born out of their awful tragedy that these parents, probably a handful of them, like 6 of them, got together and created this nonprofit. And now that's all they do is churn out videos and information and trainings for schools, students, teachers, administrators, etc., on how to ensure that you can try to make sure your school's safe. How do you identify someone who could be a potential school shooter? How do you address that individual? So it's awful that these people have been through these things, but it's great that these, like, in this case, Stoneman Douglas, in that case, Sandy Hook, they all are trying to do what's necessary to make those changes so that hopefully the tragedies don't happen again, because it's awful.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, not that it's the same thing, but the Secret Service, I mean, this is just kind of how it is, right? I remember learning about it, obviously, before my time, but, looking back, the JFK assassination has nothing to do with all the conspiracy stuff, but he's in a convertible just rolling through the street. Like, you can't even fathom that these days, right? And then the next step, which I learned, was they bulletproof the windshield and the front windows, but the back was still glass. It's like, that's a terrible idea. Who thought of that? But they did that for a little while until somebody goes, hey, what if somebody shoots from behind and then it's just going to bounce around and ricochet? They're like, oh yeah, that's right. And it's a progressive thing. Michelle, I appreciate you joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I reiterated a little bit. I'll reiterate a little bit. I met you when I was working for the Secret Service on the Vice President's detail, Kamala Harris, and she was doing a site visit. And you can actually correct me. I think she's the highest political figure to have visited the school site. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Because I know there was a ton in the year. well, initially when it happened, and then in the years transpiring. I was explaining that to Mo, how they preserved that building. So, heads of law enforcement agencies, federal, local, municipal, for training purposes, to understand legislators, congresspeople, senators, I think I understood. So there was a lot of visitors trying to just kind of see what happened, and the idea that it was preserved, I think that was a really good idea. I mean, it's a tragedy, but to be able to do that, to show the severity and like how that hit the community, I think that was excellent. And I don't know who thought to do that, but it was well done.
Thank you. Yeah, it provided an opportunity for, just like you stated, law enforcement, legislators to really see the aftermath of a school shooting, and what that entails, and what that looks like. So I know that experience was very impactful for the folks who did walk through the building. It has been torn down, so it's been down for a little over a year now. Well, a little less than a year, I guess. We initiated it last year around this time. That was part of the healing process too, having that building taken down, because for years anybody who drove by the campus still saw that building as a reminder of the most horrific day in the history of the school and the community.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Before we get into that, because I got you here, just a little brief summary. How'd you grow up? Where'd you grow up? Kind of in the sense of what got you into education and then eventually principal.
So interestingly enough, I never aspired to be a teacher or in education at all. I'm the daughter of two retired teachers, both at the elementary level. And my parents love their professions. And I can be quoted, or was quoted, as saying, I will never be a teacher. So my mom still laughs that that's what I used to say as a little girl. My degree is actually in biology with a minor in chemistry. I love growing up, still love science. And I actually wanted to go to veterinary school. So I graduated Florida State University, and veterinary school is actually very challenging to get into because there are so few programs in the United States. A lot of people actually go to other countries to complete most of their coursework and then come here for their residency and doing their clinical work. So when I met, the only school in Florida is University of Florida, the veterinary school, that is. So I met with the recruiters there, had some conversations. I worked at an animal hospital all through college, working with exotic animals. I've done surgery on Florida panthers, otters, you name it. Really cool stuff.
Very cool.
And dogs and cats and, birds, your typical household pets. But at any rate, when I met with the recruiters, they said, you know what, it's so hard to get in, get a master's degree and then apply. And I thought, well, all I know is science. What should I get a master's degree in? And my mom, I have to credit her, she found a program advertised at her school, which was a master's in science, but with the education courses. And my mom said, why don't you give this a try? If you don't get into vet school right away, maybe you could teach biology. She said at the high school level, you love science so much, give it a try. So I did my program. I actually, interestingly enough, was placed here at Stoneman Douglas for my work in the classroom, which was required as part of the program. And I ended up falling in love with teaching the biology to high school students, and I never applied to vet school again. I was hired here right after my internship in my master's program, taught here for 6 years, only school I ever taught in. Then decided I wanted to expand my horizons and do a little more than just teach inside the classroom. And I went into administration, was an assistant principal for 6 years. And then I was hired as a principal at another school down south, Flanagan High School. And then I was there from 2011 until 2019. And at 2019, I got a knock at my door. And they said, obviously there was a shooting. We need you to help lead the recovery. I live in the city of Parkland where the school is. And I had taught here, had just been honored as Principal of the Year for the state of Florida. So kind of all of the stars aligned. And I've been here ever since. So since 2019.
Now, obviously, we're cops, so we look at these situations from a cop standpoint.
Right.
But little funny thing, I recently started substitute teaching, so I'm having to kind of look at it from a different angle now.
You're a brave woman. I think that's scarier than being on the beat as a cop.
It is. I was more nervous doing that than going to calls for service. So. But when you get that call and they say, hey, we need you to lead this recovery effort, that's not something as a principal that, you train for, you take classes in. What goes through your mind? How do you prepare for that?
That's a great question, Mo. And I will tell you, I didn't know what to expect. I had never, and you're right, you're not trained for that. There's nothing, even if there was a training, there's nothing that can effectively prepare you for what you're walking into and the things that you will see. And also the things how long term the process of recovery is. And, Tyler, you said it before, I do a lot of speaking engagements. I've had the honor and privilege to speak at the White House, at congressional meetings. And I will tell you, that's the one thing I stress is just the longevity of the recovery process. And even though you experience the tragedy, the same tragedy, each person's journey is different. And so that's important to remember. Everybody kind of processes at a different pace and goes through the recovery. And somebody asked me, it's interesting, someone asked me the other day, they said, do you ever consider people recovered? I said, no, it's just an ongoing process. You're just in different stages of recovery. So to answer your question, Mo, I, really paired up with an amazing colleague of mine who I'm pleased to call a colleague and a friend. She's a mental health professional and serves as the victim's advocate for all of the victims' families, who unfortunately lost their lives that day. And then those families of students who were injured or even staff members who were injured. And she really helped me in terms of becoming trauma informed and trauma trained and knowing what that means. And that's another important piece. There is the mental health profession and field, but there's also the trauma piece. And even though you're a mental health professional, you may not be trained or proficient in trauma response, which is there's a whole nother element to that. So I work with her, and when I have questions, I ask. We now actually train together. We do a lot of work, collectively, because it's so critical in that recovery process that you have a two-pronged approach. You have, in reference to a school, you have a school administrator or professional who knows the inner workings of the school, the logistics, what's needed to run a school. And then you also need the mental health professional who can help balance that piece out. And we work alongside each other. And it's been such a help. For me too, as the leader, there's a lot of weight on you as the leader, and you need that support as well to effectively support others. And she's really been that for me.
And when you look at it, you're having to make sure your students heal, your administrators, your teachers. That's vast, because they're all going to be, like you said, it's not going to be just different levels. They have different viewpoints, because just maturity levels too, when you're talking about high school students versus an adult.
Absolutely. And then you have to remember too, you have kids coming in who may be siblings of somebody who is here. So you have that, that added element to make sure that you're caring for them and sensitive to those emotions and those things they're going through and their families are going through.
I didn't think about that, the sibling part, because Mo and I were cops together, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Even victims, like right after a horrific thing occurred, you'll see victims that are just angry, fired up, want to get the bad guy or whatever it is. And you'll see other ones that just kind of shut down. Both responses are appropriate, in my opinion. You can't tell somebody how to process that. But then to go on, it's almost generational at this point. My brother, my sister, whatever was here. And then you're also having just the impact to the community. The scope is growing for me in my mind. I was kind of...
It's vast. It really is vast. And I think too, Tyler, to your point, when we were going through the trial and going through the building visits, there was a time when they came in and did I don't want to call it a reenactment. It wasn't a reenactment, but it was a sound reenactment as part of one of the civil suits. So we had to really think about the community at large, because they did it where they were actually setting off rounds inside the building to see how far the sound permeated as part of their case. So we had to really then partner with the community and partner with our leadership in the city, because we knew it was the summertime. We knew we had kids home from college who were here that day, and that would be very traumatic, depending on how far the sound would travel if they, God forbid, were in the vicinity and heard those shots, emanating from the building where they were set off, years prior. So there's that piece as well. And then there's also the added element, you look at the Florida State shooting that just took place. Yeah. We have kids who were there, who were here. So think about that.
I didn't know that. Yeah. I didn't. Wow. I didn't know that. I didn't even think about that. I just re-traumatizing them over and over again.
100%. Yeah, we were saying, in fact, I just came back from DC, and we were saying in those visits, I was with some other principals who had experienced school shootings in their building, and there are many of us, but there were 3 of us in a room, and we just looked around and said, here on that day, there were about 3,300 kids. In the other principal school, there were 1,200. In the other principal school, there were 800. And you think about just in that room alone, you had over 5,000 students exposed to, a school shooting. And it's scary how frequent, these tragedies are occurring.
I think it's an important point to bring up too. Like you said, you had 3,300 students at the school. They don't have to be in that building. They don't have to have been one of the students that were injured or shot. They don't even have to have seen it. But just being at that school is enough to create trauma. People don't realize that.
Yeah.
I will tell you on a personal note, my oldest son was in 8th grade at the time, and our middle school where he was attending, we share a property line with our school. So having experienced that as a parent, because I first learned about the shooting from my own son, who called and said, we're in a code, at the time it was called code red. We're in a code red, not a drill, and I thought, what is going on? And I was a principal at another school, and these things, you do have codes and you have things that happen. You never in your wildest dreams think there's an active shooter. And it was him who said to me, there are kids from Douglas locked in here with us. My teacher pulled them in. He was in a portable classroom, so it was an outside external classroom. And he said, his teacher pulled in kids during the code red who were from Douglas. And he said, there's a shooter. There are kids from Douglas here. They saw the shooter. And then your heart sinks and you think, where is the shooter? Here's my child in a portable classroom and out exposed, and we don't know where this perpetrator is or what's actually going on. So you're correct. So he wasn't even at the school. He was at the neighboring school. However, his experience and what he endured was very traumatic.
Yeah.
And it impacted him really, really significantly.
Wow. Well, let's kind of jump right into it. So you get the request, the nod, the tap, so to speak. It's the year after. What was that like? What were some of the struggles, some of the successes? What did that look like for you?
The emotions were very mixed. I was honestly very honored that, I would be thought of to take on that responsibility. It was a heavy responsibility, a very heavy lift, and I knew that. So there was that piece. There was also apprehension of not knowing what to expect. You're walking into really the unknown, and it's not like I can pick up the phone and ask my friend down the street who's been a principal for a while, hey, can you help me? So there's that piece. I will tell you I'm the member of an organization called the Principal Recovery Network, which is part of NASSP, which is the National Association of Secondary School Principals. We actually reach out to people exactly in my position. And I do that now. I do that work now and say, hey, I've been there. I know what you're going through. I can help. I can listen. I can give you some suggestions. I can tell you what's worked for me through my lived experience. And that group has become a family. And that's actually who I was with in DC just a couple days ago. And we actually do advocacy work now, raise awareness, and assist others going through these types of tragedies because they're, like you said, Mo, you said it perfectly. There is no formal training for this. We actually published a document called the PRN, Principal Recovery Network Guide to Recovery. It's basically a collection of our shared experiences and what has worked and things that principals can think about, not only after a tragedy, but things you can do proactively to make sure you're doing all that you can with what's in your control as far as prevention is concerned.
Got it. So what was kind of like the first steps? Like you got parents, you got administrators, you got political pressure, students, first and foremost, student safety. You're trying to figure out how to deal with this issue and also make sure it doesn't happen again. What was kind of like the first, first month, I guess. I don't even know how to break it down.
So it started, it was, myself and the principal who I replaced, we both told our current staff at the same time. So we had those meetings set up. He let them know he would not be returning, and I let my staff know I would not be returning, would be coming here. That was followed by a press conference. So that's pretty surreal. They said, are you ready for your press conference? I said, what press conference? And they said, you have to do a press conference because it was a very big, it was a very widely publicized, tragedy. And so after I told my staff I had to go that day, do a press conference with all the news outlets. There's nothing like seeing your name on the ticker of CNN, Michelle Kefford to be the new principal.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh gosh,
normal.
What am I walking into? But so my first really step, I'm a big on communication. So what I did is I called individually every staff member, introduced myself, asked if they had any questions, let them ask me any questions, reviewed all of the data of the school, protocols and procedures, safety, as well as all other protocols and procedures. Then there's the academic piece, right? People have to remember we're still a school.
Yeah.
So we're working on academics, curriculum, and all that I will call the regular, school functional things. Met with all of the groups, my PTSO, my parent groups, met with some student groups. I also met with the victims' families.
Oh, wow.
And that was my,
okay.
Yeah, I did. I met with all the
individually or collectively?
Collectively. It was a meeting set up by our superintendent, and that was in conjunction with my mental health professional, Lisa, that I just shared the story with you about her. And we kind of walked through that together. And then, then you jump in and you become the principal and you do the best you can And that's what I do every day is the best I can. I try to be very, very proactive. Like I said, communication, I can't underscore that enough, making sure that you're constantly communicating and that you're available and open. Things have changed a lot. I've been here 6 years, and I will tell you, when I first got here, we really had to modify a lot of things. There were a lot of things that work as what I refer to as activators that would re-traumatize or activate that trauma response in folks. And one of those things was the fire alarm, that the fire alarm went off during the shooting. Yep. So we spent many years modifying our emergency drills and not using the fire alarm. And when we went back, now we use it again, but when we went back and there was a lot of communication. Hey, we're going to start to use the fire alarm. We did it with our staff with no kids in the building, just so they could acclimate themselves and understand they're going to hear the noise. So we did that. And we made sure everyone was okay with, going forward with reinstituting the fire alarm. All of my emergency drills for the lockdowns and things like that, I verbally talked my staff and my kids through it. I would be on the intercom the entire time so they could hear my voice. This is just a drill. I'm here with you. We're just practicing. We're just being prepared. So there were a lot of things that really had to be changed to kind of meet what the needs of everybody, what their needs were at that time. So like I said, it's changed. We're back to some of the more standard drills now, but we had to get there. And I had to make sure that our staff was okay and the timing was okay, to get them to where they were comfortable.
No, so. Fair enough. So what about the security measures? Because I know post the Parkland shooting, a lot of schools, not all, I think there's an effort to make it all chain link fences, like physical barriers, ramping up cameras, door locks, things like that. Actually, I'll just real quick. One of the things I learned and I hadn't even thought about was most schools don't have direct feeds to the local PD with their cameras and stuff. And it makes sense because I don't think we worked at Hillsborough County together. I don't think that was a thing we had either. And I don't know if we do now or not, but that was one of the things saying, hey, if something like this happens, the local PD can then activate the cameras to see what's going on, because when you have an incident like that, the amount of phone calls, like sometimes 911 will shut down. There's only so many people to handle the phone calls, so they can get eyes on, ascertain what's going on, send the appropriate, guide them in, that kind of thing. So that was one thing that I was like, that's a great idea to have good cameras that work. That's not specific at your school, but just I've seen other areas where it's like, yeah, we have 30 cameras, 3 of them work, but make sure they work. Connect them to the PD, being able to lock the doors so that you can get out, but people can't get in for all the buildings. I'm trying to think, there's so many good things about that. That's enough. What kind of steps have been taken, and then where are we going?
We have a ton of cameras. There were definitely cameras added after the tragedy. Tragedy was in February of 2018. We assumed leadership here July of 2019. So it was a little over a year. But, in the immediate aftermath, I know there were things added. We have a ton of cameras now, hundreds. And there is the ability for PD to tap into those cameras 100%. And they do. If there's, ever a situation where there's, a threat or an incident or whatever the case is, and they need to get eyes on the campus, they will. And they do, which is great. To your point, like there should be that access. Our school, all of our doors automatically lock. You cannot unlock them. I mean, you can unlock them, but you can't keep them unlocked. They stay locked. And then our whole district at the high school level instituted this school year for the first time metal detectors. So every student and every visitor who walks on campus is required to walk through a weapons detection device. So that is another element that was added again just this past school year. So it was a little bit. We did have handheld wands prior to that we utilized, but those were not used every day. They would do, random sampling. We also use those for events, after school events, and we still have those for that purpose. But yeah, things have changed. Things have definitely evolved. I would say also in terms of how many security personnel, that schools have.
Are these armed security personnel or like PD?
We do have both. We have armed school resource officers, and we also have security folks who are there to observe and monitor and make sure things are operating as they should. We have people at all times monitoring our cameras. So there's pretty rock solid security in terms of monitoring the facility and making sure that we identify anything that should not be going on.
I can tell you on the law enforcement side, there's been a change in the way cops respond to incidents like that, active shooting, things like that. Has there been any training for teachers, administrations? Is there any type of training that I guess for you guys? I guess I don't know how to formulate that question, but on the other side, not just law enforcement.
Yes, we do training every year, and then we do practices in terms of working through our emergency procedures on a monthly basis. We also intermittently throughout the year work with law enforcement to work through exercises through a tabletop platform. The other piece I think that's really great, which Florida is ahead of the curve, is we have a very comprehensive behavioral threat assessment, suicide risk assessment protocol program. I know a lot of states don't have that. I think there are only 11, if I'm correct, that have a standard and very formatted process for that. And that's critical because you have to have a means to evaluate and act upon situations that are brought to you. And if you don't have a very clear protocol to follow, that's going to be problematic. And so for us here in Florida, we have a very, and that goes in line with training. I mean, we have that training and we go through it, and, you have to, that's monitored at this, at the state level. You have to make sure that you show documentation you've been through that training, and the steps and the procedures. We also have a department devoted to that who works through, and once we go through the behavior threat assessment protocol, and that team makes a determination on the level of threat that is posed by that student or that individual, that then comes to me and I have to review it. And then I have to decide if I agree or disagree with it. I have the opportunity to agree with it, agree with what they have put in place, and or kick it back and say, we need a more thorough deep dive into this. Law enforcement is 100% involved in that process, and it's a team. So it's not just somebody sitting in a room saying, hey, I think Tyler poses this level of risk. It's a team collective effort looking at all different pieces of information. It's very, very comprehensive. After I review it, it also goes to a district department. They review it and they decide, hey, we agree, or hey, I have some additional questions. What about this? So you have multiple eyes on, these things, which is very important. And like I said, it's extraordinarily robust, comprehensive, so that we make the best determination and put the best process in place, given whatever information is in front of us.
Let me ask you a little bit on that too, because while the security things that we're talking about are great, but those are things that we have in place for if something happens. The threat assessment to me is phenomenal, because that's a precursor. Let's try to catch it before it becomes a tragedy, essentially. Is that something that you're working with legislation to make? Because you said Florida's ahead of the curve, but a lot of states don't have this. Is this something that we're working to try to bring to other states so that this can be nationwide?
So there actually are a lot of resources out there that people may not be aware of. One of the agencies we work with is CISA. You probably know them pretty well, Tyler, given your work in government. But CISA is a division of the U.S. government that really works on safety measures. They have a repository of resources that are available at schoolsafety.gov, and they have guidance and links to anything from grants to protocols that states can access. So we talk about the importance of that because, if you're in a state where you don't have that readily available to you, and I'm just speaking with the principal hat on, and you have a threat, you're doing the best you can to try to assess and evaluate the nature of the threat, the validity of the threat, like what the level of the threat. But if you're not really sure, you don't know what you don't know, if that makes sense.
Right.
So having that in place, I think is paramount, having that on a national level. And we've talked about that, especially through my work with the PRN, just the importance of assisting schools, especially some of these schools in maybe rural areas that are smaller. They don't have necessarily the resources that a big urban school district like I work in has. So, so to answer your question, sorry, I was a little long-winded, Mo.
No, fine.
But yes, I think it's critical. I think it is so imperative to have a comprehensive system to make sure the training is there, the assistance is there, the support is there. And I can tell you, our district has done a phenomenal job of, it's obviously it's a state tool, but we also have district supports in place so that if principals have questions or assistant principals have questions, they have that resource there to assist them to walk through the process and identify maybe blind spots that they didn't see. So it's really, really great. Like I said, multiple eyes on that, because that's a critical piece to prevention is, and I will tell you, having, being at a school where there has been a massive school violence event that resulted in unimaginable tragedy, people don't take any safety concerns lightly. People here, if they see something, they will say something. And that's great, because I think sometimes if, people have the attitude, oh, it won't happen here, it won't happen to me, that type of thing. This city of Parkland was voted, I think, one of the safest cities to live in prior to the tragedy. I mean, just a few months prior to the tragedy. And then, it can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
And people need to understand that it can happen anywhere at any time. And people have to be vigilant. They have to be prepared the best they can to prevent or mitigate any potential risk or threat.
Absolutely.
Well, let me ask you this first question. What are you seeing, again, not just at Parkland, but because you do speak on a larger stage, are you seeing that understanding being pushed out to the school district superintendent? Like, I guess, where are you seeing successes and where are you seeing some pushback or maybe some hurdles?
It depends. It depends state by state. Every state is very different. I haven't worked with every state, but I've worked with administrators in many different states. And I can tell you that sometimes they're blown away by the magnitude of resources we have, so I kind of utilize my position and my experience to help others. I mean, it's really given me a renewed sense of purpose. I've always loved being a principal, still do. I love working with the kids. I love, being at the school. I love the energy. I love everything about it. But this piece, being able to help people, if they can learn from, what we've experienced, I'm grateful for that opportunity and that gift to be able to help. But there are so many states that just don't have, they don't have the resources, they don't have the know-how. And it starts at the top, right? Because if you have somebody in upper leadership in a school district who's never experienced a tragedy, they don't know what they don't know. Like I keep saying that. I have a colleague and friend who was a principal that did it in a school that experienced a school shooting in another state. And she actually left the principalship because basically she didn't get the support that she needed. And she was struggling herself, with that social emotional piece and, having to have identified a victim of that shooting and not, basically she was given the marching orders, go ahead and continue to lead your school. And she was like, but I don't know what to do. I don't know how to manage all of this. And it caused her to leave. And so I think, if people, there's just no formal training for this, right? Which is why we created the group we created, is to provide the support that we can and the resources that are at our disposal so we can assist others. And like I said, when there's a shooting, we convene as a committee and we reach out to that school leadership and say, hey, we're here. We're here. If you just need to talk, here's the guide to recovery. Here's some things that have worked for us. But all too often, like I said, some states, they don't have leadership who's experienced it. They didn't expect it, and they don't know how to effectively, lead the principal to school in the recovery.
Let me ask you, with becoming a new principal, is there leadership training that you guys have set in place? So like being cops, if you get promoted, they put you through leadership training. And if so, do they now incorporate, even if it's just an hour, at least having a conversation about this type of situation? Because, and maybe they're not doing it everywhere, but here in the state of Florida, are they incorporating that somewhere in the leadership training for the principals and vice principals that are coming into these roles to initiate that support before it ever happens?
So every district is different. There are certain things that are state run, right? Like the behavior threat assessment, suicide risk assessment protocols. However, the individual training is generally speaking run district by district. Whatever Palm Beach County does, which is to the north of us, is going to be different than what Broward does, different than what Miami-Dade, different than, Pinellas County, any other county in Florida. So it's really up to the district. So I can't speak globally as far as what training is provided. As part of our leadership trainings, there is not a specific school tragedy training that is provided or that I know of. And that's honestly something that I've been personally fighting for, is adding that to the education curriculum for pre-service teachers at the collegiate level, because we're in a different day and age now. We really are. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a school shooting, right? It could be, look at California with the fires. Any kind of traumatic, tragic event. What are you doing and how well equipped are you to handle that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, and just keeping, school shootings in mind, but when you have things like this happen and the healing process and the recovery process is pretty similar. regardless of, people think sometimes like there was a school shooting, but there were no casualties. It's still super traumatic for those people who experienced it. And I think sometimes that's a very big misconception of people who are not trauma trained and not trauma informed. They don't understand that. Not because they don't want to understand, they just have never been put in a place to be able to, or have to process that, or have to work, in the confines of that type of situation. So there is not, to answer your question, there is not a training specific to that. That's why we created the Guide to Recovery, which is a great document. And actually, I will hold it up just as this is a free document, but just so I happen to have it right here because I just came back from DC.
Yeah.
I want to show you though, but it's available on the NASSP website. Here it is.
Which, Michelle, I'll get that website from you and I'll put it in the notes so people can go to it. Yep, there you go.
This is what we created. The website is at the bottom. Or on the back, sorry.
Gotcha.
So it's a great tool. And again, it was a labor of love. We all authored it together, myself and the other Principal Recovery Network principals, and whoever it can be of use to, we're happy. Please just look through it. We made it short and succinct for that purpose. It's got, 6 little elements in there of things to look for and things to do and little anecdotals. So
it's just very interesting to me because as active shooters became such a big thing on the law enforcement side, we have such specific training. We rolled out, I was part of the cadre that created our first active shooter training, and we had to roll it out to every agency here. So that's the reason why I'm curious as to how it is working on that side, because it has become such a thing for us to specifically train for. And obviously
we do drills. But we do that. We do a safety training, like I said, 100%. But as far as how to deal with the aftermath of sort of big tragedy, there's not really.
And to me, that's the piece that you guys have the most input, is that aftermath part of it, that recovery piece, and trying to, leads me into another question, get them back to some sense of normalcy. When you were saying at the very beginning, just little nuances logistically, like we can't use our fire alarm. We have to do things different like that. Those kinds of things that maybe the book you just showed with the Principal Recovery Network created, you already have the training in place. Let's at least start equipping these people so that in the horrible event that something like this happens, they're able to kind of hit the ground running and not flounder as much.
Yeah. Michelle, so again, I traveled around a bunch and I worked at a bunch of
I know you did.
Yes, I did, with a bunch of schools, even overseas, things like that. But I'm going to make it a statement and try to turn it into a question. It's interesting to me, again, talking to administrators, staff, again, college, high school, elementary school. It's almost like they're like, it's so sad that's happening. It shouldn't be happening. And that's about as far as it goes, as opposed to this is happening. We need to learn how to deal with this. We need to train on how to prevent it. It's, I don't want to say put their head in the sand. That's not what I'm trying to say. But it's almost like this shouldn't be happening. This is a school. This shouldn't be happening. It's like, okay, but it is. How do we prevent it? How do we address it? What do we do if it does happen? That kind of a thing. Are you seeing any of those conversations just in your professional community? Or again, it's hard because I know in Florida, especially Parkland, you guys you're full
We're on it.
You're on it. Mm-hmm. But I guess when you go and you speak out to other states or districts?
So, like I said, it just kind of depends on the state or district. I had the opportunity to present, I think it was about a year ago, maybe a year and a half, at the Utah Safety Conference and School Safety Conference. And so it was, people from Utah, from neighboring states that kind of came, and it was interesting. They were very kind of surprised by a lot of the things that we do. I did that training alongside Lisa, my colleague, mental health professional, and really the training was about the model that we created, because we did create our own model that really is not implemented anywhere else that I know of, where it's school administrator and mental health professional working in tandem, and we talk about what has worked for us. So in that training and in our sessions, we had, like I said, school staff, from administrators to counselors to teachers. And it was interesting, how a lot of them didn't have, as robust protocols as we have, and had not heard of functioning in the way that we function.
Yeah.
We came together as a necessity, but, our relationship really bloomed and blossomed into this beautiful collaboration, that is very, we're open with each other. We're vulnerable with each other. We really learn from one another. I think that's important. You have to sit here and say, hey, I've never done this before. Help me to be better. And that's really what we do for each other. So looking at that, Tyler, there are so many school districts in so many states that they haven't experienced anything like this. And you really no ding on them, but you can't fully understand it unless you really experienced it, because there are so many layers to it. And like I said, it's such a long-term process. And, we've got kids that were, who were babies, relatives who were babies when this happened. You've got, like you said, it's generational. You've got kids that will ultimately come through here, maybe long after I leave, right? Because of their journey.
Yeah.
But we know, it's important to know, we know who every one of those kids is, and we monitor those kids, and we work with the feeder schools also to make sure they know who those kids are. And that's an important piece too, is kind of that big outreach and knowing and understanding how far reaching the impacts are, and making sure those individuals who had a more direct impact are looked after, and they're provided with support, and they're provided with resources all the way through.
It's interesting you say that, because I ended up going to the same high school as my mother, and I had one of her same professors 30 years later.
Wow.
Even though we lived in she was a Marine, 15 different states. It just, the world kind of just came all the way back, and she's like, he's still teaching there? My God. But to your point, that could very well happen, where it's like somebody's kid 30 years from now or whatever it is, end up being, that's a crazy point. I want to ask, because I know you got a heart out. You're going to speak in front of Congress. Yes, I gotta ask this, because I've watched it, I've seen it, I've been in the room while people do it, but here you are, wanted to go to veterinary school, taught high school science. I'm a principal in Florida. Now I'm talking in front of Congress. One, what was the experience like? Two, what were you talking about or advocating? I don't know exactly what you're doing.
So, the experience was great. I never take those things lightly or take it for granted. I really don't. Having the opportunity to have an audience like that, is very impactful. And just having that partnership, right, with the people who make laws, the people who, can make things happen. That piece, I'm grateful for those opportunities. I'm grateful for those experiences. Speaking at the White House was one, experience where I was just, I never thought in a million years I would ever be speaking at the White House. But again, being very grateful for the opportunity to use my voice to make a difference and to facilitate change. So those experiences were amazing, and I don't take them lightly. I am very grateful that I'm able to provide that voice and that, that view of what happened. It's a message of advocacy. Like, what are we doing for safety measures? And that's kind of, I share my story usually first, my lived experience, both as a principal in leading a school in recovery, but also as a mom whose son called her and said, I'm scared. There's a code red and there's kids here who saw a guy with a gun. What do I do, Mom? I'm scared. And, so having, that experience both as a parent and as a principal, I try to share the emotions of that and the reality of that. We talk about advocacy. We talk about different things in legislation. One of the things I just came back from my legislative visits was talking about funding, school funding. Talking about, they're talking about cutting funding, and one of the areas of funding is Title II, and that's funding used specifically for training in schools. We need that money, and it's not just training in the new math program or the curriculum, it's training in safety. It's all of that. And a lot of people, if you're not in a school, you don't understand that piece. So it's bringing awareness to, if we make these cuts or we eliminate this funding, this is going to be the results. The other piece is Project Serve. There's a grant called the Serve Grant. And that grant is what facilitates for after tragedies and events. It could be a school shooting. It could be a natural disaster. It's money given by the federal government to schools to recover. That is what we utilize to build our wellness center, which we have still in existence on our campus. What we used to get up and running again after our tragedy. And the federal budget for that, I think, is $5 million. $5 million for every tragedy, every shooting event, every, that happens. It's not enough. And then if there's conversations about cutting that funding, imagine, and we talked about this. I was in the room with Kathy Gabos, who's the principal of Sandy Hook. She said, can you imagine if Sandy Hook and Stoneman Douglas occurred in the same year? The CERB grant wouldn't be able to sustain and support both of us, right? So it's about making people aware of what these funds are actually used for and the importance of, the monies and things like that. That's just one piece of it. We also work in collaboration with, talking about mental health, the importance of mental health. It's interesting because you guys are both from law enforcement. My experience in talking to a lot of law enforcement professionals is their focus on the hardening of the schools, like the locks and the cameras and the gates and the this, but there's also a mental health piece, the behavioral threat assessment, the suicide risk assessment, identifying kids who are at risk and intervening so they don't go that route. And that's the piece we can't miss either. Right. So it's all of those things, and it's just about bringing awareness. It's about, making people understand the reality of what this looks like so that they can, make their decisions with all of the knowledge at their disposal.
Sorry, just a couple more. And Mo, I know you got one.
No.
Have any law enforcement agencies partnered with you on this in this effort? Because I'm having a hard time envisioning a world where people don't want to help fund schools to keep them safe and educate our children. I understand there's pushback out there, but what you're articulating to me, I'm like, who is against that? I don't understand. But is there anyone on the law enforcement side who's working with you or speaking with you or advocating on school behalf, that type of thing?
Not through these efforts. I mean, we had an amazing sergeant here who really got it. He responded 214, since moved. He works now at the airport, but he was phenomenal. And he didn't speak with me, but we would often collaborate. We still talk and collaborate because he really gets it and wants to make a difference. But I think that would be an amazing partnership, Tyler. I really feel like having both entities at the table would make a big difference because there's, again, to your point, law enforcement, all of that. I don't. I'm not out there. But I know school operations and I know some of the stuff that can happen in schools, but how powerful is this to mesh together? Right? To combat it from all fronts, because you're going to see things or foresee things that I don't, and I'm going to see things or foresee things that you don't. Right? And so having that 360 view with the different viewpoints is so powerful.
Michelle, I might reach out to you afterwards because Mo's on a lot of boards and does a lot of mental health stuff for law enforcement.
I would love that. Honestly, I would love it. Yeah. I would love it. That was one of the people we met with just recently was the new head of school safety, for the U.S. government. And we had some conversations there too, So I think bringing all parties to the table, it would be great. And I'd be happy. This has become my passion, honestly, is, beyond, being a top rated school academically and, extracurricularly, all the accolades. Our kids are our most important resource. We have to protect that resource. You know what I mean? It is incumbent upon us. And my job has changed as a principal. I am not just the academic leader. I have to be, the person who is all knowing about safety, all things. It's a very heavy job, but whatever we can do. And if I can use my platform and my voice and my experience to make things better for other kids, other teachers, schools, other states, I am beyond happy to do so.
Absolutely. Mo, you got any other questions? I know Michelle's got a heart out. She's
no,
still
I know.
working.
I'm sorry. I know I am.
I know you said that you're big on communication. That was part of your thing when you came into Stoneman Douglas. And I will tell you that that probably helped so much with getting the school kind of back to where it is today, because listening to you talk and hearing, you didn't even have to tell me it was your passion, hearing the passion in you about what it is that you're doing. It's just, as somebody who did law enforcement, I am just all ears and opened up listening. I appreciate your time and thank you for it.
But reach out after. Honestly, I'd love to have some additional conversations, what we can do to partner together, because I think there really needs to be that multi-pronged approach.
I've seen that tends to work. I don't want to say better, but it works. It helps. So let's just phrase it that way. It definitely helps when you can bring together different agencies with the same goal. They're like, oh shit, this is actually, okay, this is important. What I mean?
Well, and I'll talk offline with you, but I want to develop a training. I do teach, I do train and I do teach. In addition to the speaking engagements. So I've wanted to do a collaborative law enforcement, school, professional mental health. So I have a lot of ideas. So that's another conversation. But if you guys are in, I am happy.
You're talking to a big advocate right there with Mo.
Okay, Mo.
Doing in Florida. So
Mo, where are you, Mo? Where are you located?
I'm in Pasco County, but we worked in Hillsborough County. So I have connections kind of all over those places.
Perfect.
But I've been an adjunct instructor for years in the law enforcement world. So I love teaching.
Yeah.
Me too. I teach a ton of courses in this district, leadership courses that I've created. And then we've created, like I said, with my counterpart who's a mental health professional, we've created training as well that we talk
That's
about
awesome.
recovery. So
That's awesome. And
reach
we
out
have
to
a
me.
big idea of like mental health is so big across the board.
And I'm so glad to hear you say that because honestly, sometimes in law enforcement, like I said, it's just focused on that, the hardening. And you're like, no,
There's so much more. Yes,
Awesome.
definitely.
All right,
Talk
Michelle, thank
offline.
you. I'll reach out. Yeah, I'll get you guys together. All righty.
Thanks, Michelle.
Bye-bye. What'd you think, Mo?
Loved it. I so intrigued with hearing her speak. And like I said, like her passion comes through. And for her to have that much passion for somebody who wasn't there the day of the tragedy, that tells you what that recovering process must have looked like because she had to learn, how do you get this school back to a level of normalcy while creating a safer environment for your students, your teachers, just awe-inspiring. I loved it. Great conversation with her.
It's hard to capture in this because I spent like a week there putting it all together. You see, like, again, you can see like all the kids. I can't remember. They didn't call her Michelle. I did, but they all knew who she was. Miss Kefford, Principal Kefford, whatever. Every kid that walked by. Again, my principal at my high school, everyone was like, "Oh, bob and weave." They're trying to get out of. They don't want to be seen.
Right.
It's not like that. And dude, this is what I'm saying. Like I start talking about these things, and she's like, we are still a school. We have to teach and they have to pass tests and standardized tests. And we have all these other things that we've been doing before the shooting that we have to still do.
Right.
But now add on top of that mental health, adding security, finding bodies to do the security, money for all the security. And then on top of that, and her own time pretty much, right? Because, she's a principal of the school. She's running it.
Right.
She then goes and speaks on behalf of not just Stoneman Douglas, but schools and like, you see what I'm saying?
Not
Like
just that, and creates the Principal Recovery Network that puts out training and books and things and to support principals that run into this awful situation. Because the first thing I thought is this is not what you don't go to education and get a degree in education and get trained on this also. They don't teach you these things, so just awe-inspiring to watch her have to encounter a tragedy of that magnitude and what she has been able to fertilize and grow out of it.
I knew it would be a good one. I'm so happy she is still actively working. Like she was like, I got an hour, and then I got more meetings and I knew you too, and it just crossed my mind.
Yeah,
but I think that would be a good fit for some of the boards that you're speaking on or working with.
Yeah,
come on, Mo.
Yeah,
we're gonna make this thing we're gonna make it work.
That is passion for me because it's not just doing, going out and teaching a class or two here. This is something that really and truly matters. Like I would love to partner and teach, teachers and then sit down and have roundtables because, we've had the discussion, should teachers be armed? Should they be? I mean, they have a totally different mindset and viewpoint than we do. So I think I was just in awe today.
Let's go. Anything you want to round it off with, Mo?
No, I thought this one went really great. I think putting the information out about the Principal Recovery Network, the links for that so that people can utilize resources because since they don't have formalized training when they do the leadership training that they're doing, this is something they absolutely need to tap into, and there was something she threw out in the middle, knowing about there's a website for school safety or something that the federal government runs. I'm curious if that's something that's well known, but getting the resources out is huge, not for people who've been through tragedy, but for the people who haven't been yet to better prepare them and bring it to a reality so that you don't think that, oh, well, it can never happen here.
Yeah. I'm going to send you her contact info now. I'm serious. Shoot her an email. She's super fired up about this.
Yeah. I love it.
Rightfully so. But it's not just she's passionate. She's good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. She communicates.
Shit, Mo, let's go. You'll be up on Capitol Hill, man.
She communicates
let's fucking go.
Very well with getting across the point. So I can see why she was selected to lead the school in this situation as well.
I learned several things I did not know about her. I did not know she had taught there before. I don't think that came up or I didn't ask or whatever. So that was her connection to it. And then I did not know she wanted to be a veterinarian.
Super interesting about that. I
love that. That first question is just like, boom, but you learn so much.
You learn. And I love the fact she says, I'm never going to be a teacher. Not only will you be a teacher, you're going to be a principal that's going to lead a school that's been through one of the worst days in history. And this is what's going to become of that for you. Talk about that. You're
going to be put on a national stage doing press conferences.
Right.
It's wild, man. That's what I'm saying. You see people that do that. It's like, they're not trained for this.
They're not.
There's no training in their life that said, here I am, and this is what. No,
these are the tales, though, from the street that people.
Yeah. Wild.
I
All
love
right,
it.
Mo.
Thank you, sir. Another
That was
good one.
awesome. Thank you.